Kumamoto, Japan, was nearly wiped off the map by a massive earthquake in 2016. The city spent the last 10 years rebuilding, reinforcing, and recovering. On July 28, 2026, at 4:27 in the afternoon, the exact same faults beneath the exact same city ruptured again. The earthquake measured 7.1 and hit just 6 miles below the surface, shallow enough to throw furniture across rooms, crack highways in half, and collapse 12 buildings before most people could reach a doorway. Within the first hour, a freight train derailed and fell on its side. Nearly 50,000 homes lost power, and a shopping mall that had just reopened 6 weeks ago after years of earthquake rebuilding was ripped apart by an explosion that collapsed its second floor onto the employees still inside. By nightfall, 300,000 people had been ordered to leave their homes. Hospitals were turning away patients because every bed was full, and Japan's prime minister called it a race against time to reach people still buried under rubble. This is not just another earthquake in a country that sees hundreds of them every year. Something far more unsettling is happening in Kumamoto, because the same faults that destroyed the city a decade ago just did it again, to the same buildings, on the same streets, to the same people who already survived this once. Today we are going to break down exactly what happened, why this earthquake struck the same city twice in 10 years, how deep the damage really goes, and what scientists are now warning could still come in the days ahead. No guessing, no dramatizing. Just the confirmed numbers, the science behind why this fault keeps breaking, and the real situation on the ground right now. If you have ever lived through an earthquake, or if you have ever felt a tremor that made you stop everything and wonder whether your building could take it, tell us about that moment down in the comments. And if this is the kind of detailed, fact-based earthquake coverage you have been looking for, the kind that mainstream news skips past in 30 seconds, hit subscribe, and join us here at Earth Dispatch. We follow these events from the first tremor to the last aftershock. It was late Tuesday afternoon in southern Japan. School had let out. Rush hour was still 30 minutes away. Shoppers were walking through the corridors of Aeon Mall, Kumamoto, and Kashima Town. Office workers in Kumamoto City were finishing the day, and then the floor moved. The shaking arrived without warning, not a tremor that built up slowly. A sudden, violent lurch that threw people sideways. Witnesses in Uto, the small city closest to the epicenter, described the ground rolling in waves they could see with their own eyes. The epicenter is the point on the surface directly above where the earthquake started underground, and in this case, it's at just 12 miles south of Kumamoto City, a metropolitan area of roughly 700,000 people. The Japan Meteorological Agency recorded the earthquake at magnitude 7.1. Magnitude is a measurement of the total energy an earthquake releases, and each whole number up means roughly 32 times more energy. A 7.1 is not slightly bigger than a 6.1, it is enormously more powerful. The United States Geological Survey later revised its own reading to 6.8. Either way, this is among the strongest earthquakes to hit Japan in a decade. The depth of the earthquake is what made it so destructive. It started just 10 kilometers below the surface, about 6.2 miles down. The shallower an earthquake, the more violent the shaking at the surface. This one started so close to the ground that the energy reached buildings almost undiluted, the way a punch from 2 inches away hits harder than you expect, because there's no distance for the energy to spread out before it reaches you. In Uki City, in Hikawa Town, the shaking registered Shindo Intensity 7. The Shindo scale is Japan's own system for measuring how hard the ground shakes at a specific location. It runs from 0 to 7. A magnitude tells you how strong the earthquake was overall. The Shindo number tells you how bad the shaking was right where you are standing. This quake hit 7, the maximum. That means the ground moved so violently that it was physically impossible for people to stay on their feet. Furniture became projectiles, refrigerators tipped over, walls sheared away from ceilings. The shaking was felt across the entire island of Kyushu. It reached Busan, the second largest city in South Korea, more than 130 miles across the sea. It reached Jeju Island. In Fukuoka, 60 miles north, high-rise buildings swayed for close to a minute. Underneath Kumamoto, 2 major fault lines had ruptured at almost the same moment. A fault zone is a crack in the Earth's crust where 2 massive slabs of rock grind against each other, and Kumamoto sits on top of 2 of them. The Hinagu fault stretches 81 kilometers. The Futagawa fault runs 64 kilometers. When they slip, the city shakes. Both slipped on July 28th. Along a 27-kilometer section of the Futagawa fault, the rock on one side moved 3.5 meters past the rock on the other side. That is roughly 11.5 feet of displacement deep underground in less than a minute. A tsunami advisory went out within minutes. The Oriaki Sea and the Yatsushiro Sea were both flagged for possible waves up to 1 meter. Coastal residents in low-lying towns were told to move to higher ground immediately. The advisory was lifted about 2 hours later after tide gauges showed the waves never grew past a few centimeters. But the fear in that window was real, because Japan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, the horseshoe-shaped zone around the Pacific Ocean, where most of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happen. Japan accounts for roughly 18% of the world's earthquakes every year, despite covering less than 1% of the planet's land surface. The shaking stopped after about 60 seconds. In some neighborhoods, people came out into the street, checked on their neighbors, and started to breathe again. But the earthquake was only the beginning of what happened that afternoon. Within minutes of the shaking stopping, reports started pouring in from across the prefecture. Not one disaster, but dozens of them happening at once. In central Kumamoto City, 12 buildings had collapsed outright. Older wooden homes in Mashiki and in Nishihara, some of them rebuilt after 2016, folded in on themselves. Roof tiles slid off in sheets. Chimneys snapped at their bases. At Yatsushiro Station, a freight train pulling containers of paper products was in motion when the shaking hit. The tracks twisted beneath it. The lead locomotive lifted off the rails and rolled onto its side, dragging 4 cars with it. No one was hurt on board, but the wreckage blocked the main rail corridor south of the city. Across the region, 48 those 300 households lost electricity. Nearly 50,000 homes and businesses in the dark, right as the sun began to set. Power lines had snapped. Substations had tripped offline. Kyushu electric crews began working immediately, but the damage was so widespread they could not give a timeline for restoration. The Kyushu Expressway, the main highway running north to south through the island, was closed in both directions. A bridge on the expressway had partially collapsed. Kumamoto Airport shut down. The runway had visible cracks. All JR Kyushu rail service was suspended, including the Kyushu Shinkansen bullet train that connects the region to the rest of Japan. Then came the phone calls from Kashima Town. Aeon Mall Kumamoto is one of the largest shopping centers on the island. It has 200 stores, 5,000 parking spaces, and 8 million visitors a year. When the earthquake hit at 4:27, staff followed their training. They evacuated roughly 200 shoppers into the parking lot within minutes. Nobody was hurt in the initial shaking. The building was 6 years old in its current form, reinforced with the newest seismic standards Japan requires. Roughly 1 hour later, an explosion tore through the mall. Investigators suspect a gas line, ruptured by the earthquake, had been leaking into an interior space the whole time. When it found a spark, the blast blew out walls on 2 sides of the building. The second floor collapsed onto the ground floor. The shoppers who had been evacuated were safe. The employees who had gone back inside to shut down systems, secure inventory, and check for damage were not. Between 20 and 30 employees could not be contacted after the explosion. Rescue teams arrived within 20 minutes. They could not enter. The remaining structure was groaning, and aftershocks kept rolling through every few minutes. At the Nippon Paper Industries factory in Yatsushiro, a factory chimney more than 40 meters tall had snapped near its base during the earthquake. When it fell, it landed on a section of the plant where 11 workers were on shift. 2 were found in cardiopulmonary arrest, the medical term Japanese officials use when a person is found without a heartbeat or breathing. It is used before a doctor formally declares death. The other 9 workers were still missing beneath the collapsed masonry. Fires broke out in Matsubase and in central Yatsushiro. In Hikawa town, the wall of a nursing home collapsed inward onto 2 elderly residents and 1 staff member. All 3 were pulled out alive but injured. At Kumamoto Castle, one of the most famous historic landmarks in Japan, still under restoration from the 2016 earthquake, with a completion date that was not supposed to come until 2052, freshly rebuilt stone walls buckled and fell for the second time in a decade. A 26-year repair job may now have to start over. Officials at the Sendai and Genkai nuclear power plants confirmed within 40 minutes that both facilities were operating normally. No abnormalities, no leaks. That single piece of good news traveled fast, because it was one of the few pieces of good news that afternoon. As darkness fell, rescue teams stood outside the shattered mall in Kashima Town, unable to enter because aftershocks kept shaking the structure. The people inside were running out of time, and the rescuers could not reach them. To understand why this hit so hard, you have to know what Kumamoto already survived. For the people of Kumamoto, this earthquake did not just feel familiar. It was the same nightmare, on the same ground, exactly a decade later. In April 2016, the same fault system ruptured in a sequence that stunned even Japan's seismologists. On April 14th, a magnitude 6.5 shock hit Mashiki town. 2 days later, on April 16th, a magnitude 7.3 main shock struck the exact same area. The pattern was unusual. Seismologists had assumed the first quake was the main event. It was not. The 2016 earthquakes killed 267 people over the following months. Only 50 of those deaths came from the earthquake itself, from collapsing homes and falling debris. The other 218 came from what happened afterward. Elderly residents in evacuation shelters, cut off from their medications and their routines, died from strokes, heart attacks, pneumonia, and the physical stress of displacement. 5 more died in related floods later that year. That second number, the 218, is the one that should concern everyone watching the current situation. More than 2,800 people were injured in 2016. In Mashiki town alone, more than 1,000 homes were destroyed. Roughly 44,000 people, were evacuated at the peak of the emergency. 100,000 homes lost power. 385,000 lost water. It was the deadliest earthquake in Japan between the 2011 Tohoku disaster and the 2024 Noto Peninsula earthquake. And there's one more detail that makes Kumamoto's story unlike any other. On July 28, 1889, exactly 137 years, to the day before this new earthquake, a magnitude of 6.3 quake struck Kumamoto. 20 people died. The same calendar date, the same city, the same faults. This is not superstition, it is geology. These faults move on their own schedule, and Kumamoto happens to be built directly on top of them. In 2016, 44,000 people were evacuated. In 2026, 300,000 people were ordered to leave their homes. That is nearly 7 times more people evacuated this time. That is not a sign of a bigger disaster. That is a sign that officials learned from what happened a decade ago. In 2016, elderly residents stayed in their homes because they were afraid of the shelters, and hundreds of them died. In 2026, prefectural authorities moved faster and moved more people because they know exactly what the alternative looks like. Kumamoto rebuilt. That is the part that makes this story different. After 2016, the city and the prefecture invested billions of yen in seismic reinforcement. Older wooden homes were retrofitted with steel bracing. New building codes required deeper foundations. Public buildings, schools, and hospitals were upgraded. And in the town of Kashima, one particular building became the symbol of that recovery. Aeon Mall Kumamoto had been badly damaged in 2016. It closed. A full redevelopment began in 2017. The rebuilt structure was designed with base isolation systems, reinforced steel framing, and seismic damping. Engineers signed off on it. It reopened on June 13, 2026, as part of what the prefecture called a restart initiative, timed to mark the 10th anniversary of Kumamoto's recovery. Banners hung from the entrances. Local officials cut a ribbon. Families walked through the doors with children who had been babies during the 2016 quake and were now in elementary school. 45 days later, the second floor of that mall collapsed. The Japan Meteorological Agency confirmed in its briefing this week that the seismic pattern of the current quake resembles 2016. One resident interviewed by NHK put it simply. The shaking, she said, reminded her of the Kumamoto quake 10 years ago. Kumamoto did not forget. They spent a decade rebuilding, reinforcing, and preparing. But the faults beneath them did not care about any of that. And now scientists are asking whether this is finished or whether the worst is still coming. And that brings us to where things stand right now, as of this morning. By Wednesday morning, Japan's prime minister had used one phrase 3 times in her public statements: race against time. The confirmed death toll stands at 13, and it is still climbing. 9 workers are still missing at the Nippon Paper Industries factory in Yatsushiro. Rescue crews have been digging through collapsed masonry for more than 18 hours. The Japanese government deployed 3,600 self-defense force soldiers to Kumamoto Prefecture. They are working the collapsed mall in Kashima Town. They are working the paper factory in Yatsushiro. They are delivering water, blankets, and portable toilets to evacuation centers across the region. Helicopters are running supply flights out of a temporary airfield because the main airport runway is still closed. The hospitals are the pressure point right now. Saiseikai Kumamoto Hospital has 400 beds. Every single one is occupied. The hospital itself has water leaks in 3 wings and a partially collapsed wall in a corridor near the emergency room. Staff are treating patients in hallways. A separate hospital in Uki City lost power completely and cannot operate at all. Its patients had to be transferred through the night to facilities in cities farther north. The medical center in Hikawa Town has already treated 80 people for injuries ranging from broken bones to head trauma. 2 other regional hospitals are each holding more than 50 earthquake patients on top of their usual load. Then there is the weather. The forecast for July 29th in Kumamoto calls for a high of 34 degrees Celsius, roughly 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Nearly 50,000 households still have no electricity. That means no air conditioning, no fans, no refrigeration for medication. In 93-degree heat with no power, that is not an inconvenience. It is a medical emergency for elderly evacuees, and it is exactly the condition that killed hundreds of people in shelters after the 2016 quake. The Japan Meteorological Agency has issued a formal warning about aftershocks. An aftershock is a smaller earthquake that follows the main one. Aftershocks can continue for days or weeks. The danger is that buildings weakened by the first quake can collapse during a strong aftershock. Right now, the JMA says strong aftershocks are possible for the next 2 to 3 days, and the elevated risk window extends a full week. The largest aftershock so far measured magnitude 5.6 and hit just 41 minutes after the main shock. 6 significant aftershocks rolled through in the first few hours. Seismologists project as many as 67 more in the coming week. The JMA has compared the current pattern to 2016, when the 6.5 was followed 2 days later by the 7.3 that did most of the damage. They will not say whether that pattern will repeat. They will say it is too early to know. Landslides have already been reported on the slopes of Mount Mayuyama, near Shimabara, in neighboring Nagasaki Prefecture. Loose earth on those slopes is exactly the kind of terrain that fails during aftershocks. That is the situation tonight. And the aftershock clock is still running. The question is not whether more shaking will come, but how much more this region can absorb. To understand why this keeps happening to the same city, you have to look at what is underneath it. Kumamoto sits at the southern end of the Japan Median Tectonic Line, the longest fault system in the country. This line runs the length of Japan the way a seam runs down the side of a shirt. Underneath Kyushu, that seam splits into a wider zone called the Beppu Shimabara Graben. A graben is a stretch of the Earth's crust that is being slowly pulled apart. The land in the middle sinks. The rock on either side moves outward. Over millions of years, this process has created the volcanic landscape of central Kyushu, including Mount Aso, one of the largest active volcanic craters in the world. Inside this rift zone, the Beppu Hanayama Fault Zone forks into 2 major faults that run directly under Kumamoto Prefecture. The Hinagu Fault is 81 kilometers long. The Futagawa Fault is 64 kilometers long. Both of them are active. Both of them slipped in 2016. Both of them slipped again on July 28, 2026. The Futagawa Fault did most of the work this time. A 27-kilometer section of it slid 3.5 meters. That is roughly the full length of Manhattan, and then some sliding sideways by about 11.5 feet in less than a minute, 6 miles beneath a city of 700,000 people. When rock moves that fast at that depth, the energy has to go somewhere. It travels upward as seismic waves. Because this earthquake started so close to the surface, only 10 kilometers down, those waves arrived at ground level almost undiluted. There is a pattern seismologists have been tracking here. Over the past decade, the epicenters along these faults have been shifting from west to east, one earthquake at a time. That is not proof that the next one will be east of this one, but it is a data point that scientists are watching closely. Zoom out, and the picture gets larger. Japan sits at the intersection of 4 tectonic plates: the Pacific, the Philippine Sea, the North American, and the Eurasian. All 125 million people in Japan live on top of that intersection. The country accounts for roughly 18% of the world's earthquakes, despite occupying less than 1% of the world's land. Kyushu, and Kumamoto specifically, sits at one of the most seismically active points in that already active country. This is the geology that Kumamoto is built on top of. It moved in 1889, it moved in 2016, it moved again on July 28, 2026. And nothing about the data suggests it is finished. Put 2 images side by side. June 13, 2026. Families walk through the entrance of Aeon Mall, Kumamoto. Banners hang above the doorway, printed with the words, "Restart" and "A Decade of Recovery" in gold letters. A ribbon is cut. Children who were babies during the 2016 earthquake run ahead of their parents into the food court. Local officials shake hands with the engineers who signed off on the seismic upgrades. The building is a monument to what a city can do when it refuses to give up. July 28, 2026. That same building, its walls blown outward, its second floor collapsed onto its ground floor, a plume of smoke rising from the parking lot. Rescue teams stand at the perimeter and cannot go in. Somewhere inside, between 20 and 30 employees are unaccounted for. The banners are still hanging, 45 days apart. Same building, same city, same faults underneath. The contrast is not between failure and success. It is between what humans can build and what the earth can undo, and the gap between those 2 timelines is the story of Kumamoto. Preparation is not the same as protection. Kumamoto did not fail. The engineers did not fail. The building codes did not fail. The city and this prefecture did more than almost any place on Earth to prepare for exactly this event. And still, the ground moved, and still people died. And still, a mall marketed as the symbol of recovery came down 45 days after its ribbon cutting. Some forces cannot be engineered away. They can only be endured. The lesson from Kumamoto is not that rebuilding was pointless. The lesson is that the people who rebuild knowing the ground beneath them will move again are the ones worth paying attention to. They are not naive. They are the opposite of naive. They understand exactly what they are up against, and they build anyway. Now we want to hear from you. Has your city or town ever been hit by a natural disaster more than once? A hurricane that returned, a flood that came back, a wildfire season that repeated itself. What changed the second time? Did people rebuild differently, or did they leave? Tell us in the comments and be specific about where you are and what you saw. Subscribe to Earth Dispatch, because we do not stop covering these events when the headline fades. We follow the aftershocks. We follow the rescue. We follow the recovery. And we follow the science that explains why any of it happened in the first place. Share this video with someone who cares about earthquake preparedness, or with someone who has family in Japan tonight.